Tilea's Troubles, Part 12. An excerpt from Bonacorso Fidelibus's work, The Many Wars of the Early 25th Century. The summer of 2401. For many in Tilea it was not a happy time. Indeed, there were even some for whom things could not be any worse. The fears concerning the vampire Duke of Miragliano had turned out to be very well founded. His dreadful army of walking corpses had laid siege to Urbino. Battle was joined before its gate as the Duchess Maria attempted to escape, perhaps hoping to plead for relief from some neighbouring power. The Duchess's subsequent whereabouts were, for many weeks, unknown. No one knew what fate had befallen her, although it was whispered she may have escaped one danger, only to fall into some new peril. Accordingly, the Archlector Callictus II of the Holy Church of More commanded that the following be proclaimed by his priests throughout the realms of Tilea. Good people of Tilea, faithful servants of More and all the lawful gods, take heed, for I bring not warnings and fearful predictions, but dire news of things that have come to pass. The wickedness in the north is no longer brooding and preparing, but has marched forth even in the bright light of day, to begin clawing and tearing at the world of the living. Even now a vast throng of abominations surrounds Urbino, and has perhaps already devoured the brave people within. This will not, however, satisfy such as the vampire Duke, More's curse be upon him. If he is not stopped, he will march on to conquer, corrupt, and consume the entirety of the north. What was our duty has become also a dire necessity, not only to please Holy More and ensure his jurisdiction over the souls of the dead is restored, but because our very survival depends upon it. Without further delay, all who can must immediately take up arms and join in the stand against the vampire and his army. Poor Rivola cannot ride against him, for brute ogre mercenaries have laid waste to that land. And in the south, the great Wag is raging. And so, we hereby call upon Viadaza, Urbimo, Remus, Trantio Pavona, and yea, even Campagrotta and the Wizard Lord, to lay aside all differences and march forth together to put an end to this terror before it devours us all. We call on nobles and militiamen, condottieri and foreign mercenaries, to muster and march with sword and spear, crossbow and handgun, lance and mace. Now is the time. We must destroy the threat before it grows too strong. May More bless all those brave warriors who obey this command, and curse all those base cowards who seek to shirk this duty. In the far south, far from the threat of undead domination, armies manoeuvred and merchants bickered, and all was as it ever was. The infamous band of mercenary raiders, known as the Greenskin Corsairs, had moved inland, for it seemed some city-state had contracted them to raid their enemies. Many warned that it did not bode well to have a Wag raging in the southeast, while greenskin mercenaries like these were active in the southwest. An interlude. The Greenskin Corsairs. As ever, they were the last to arrive at the camp. When the mules were alive, they were always behind the rest of the mob, and now the beasts had been eaten, the marrow sucked from their bones, and all agreed, very nice it was too, they were that little bit further back. The goblin, Togler, knew that Hafty did most of the heavy work, but without Togler's constant encouragement, they would probably never reach the camp by nightfall. Hafty, not the brightest of orcs, which is saying something considering the level of wit possessed by your average orc, was easily distracted. For an hour he had been complaining about his swollen toe.
"It's not just hurting, it's itching too,"
Hafty said.
"Well,"
sighed Togler,
"pull a bit faster. We'll get where we're going. Then you can get to scratching."
"I ain't gonna scratch at it, not when it hurts this much."
Not for the first time that day, Togler rolled his eyes.
"That, my big-toed friend, is what you call a dilemma."
Hafty stopped. so suddenly that Dudo the Snot nearly fell from the front of the wagon. The orc looked confused, well, more so than usual.
You talking to my toe?
He asked. Toggler had no idea where this new nonsense came from.
What do you mean, talking to your toe?
You just said he was your friend and told him about the dilemma.
Dilemma,
corrected the goblin.
The word's dilemma. Ain't that right, Dudo? Go faster! Whee!
Shouted the Snot, as he always did.
Come on, Toe,
said Toggler.
Tain't much further. You can bring Hafty along with you too, if you like.
Hafty's pained expression vanished to replace by a grin.
You is talking to me, Toe.
Hefting the pole, and once again nearly tipping out Dudo the Snot, he never learned, they set off for the final stretch. Before long, they had reached the camp's outermost tent of sewed skins. There, a bunch of big boss Poglin Fangfacer's goblins were gathered around a trestle table they had dragged from an abandoned woodsman's hut nearby. Upon the table lay a murderous-looking 5-barrelled pistol.
I told you, you'd never get the thing to work, so don't go acting all surprised,
one of them was shouting, a goblin by the name of Murder Crusty-Chin. His companion, Splitfinger, who clutched a bent ramrod in lieu of any useful sort of tool, was snarling.
It'll work all right, Murder. If you don't stop your shouting, I'll be trying it out on you first.
Another goblin, standing nearby, Agler, hefted an impressively wide-muzzled blunderbuss and glared at the other two. Murder, his red eyes gleaming with a malice that was never quite absent, drew his cutlass and raised it threateningly.
You'll not be pointing it at me if you ain't got no hands to hold it, will you, Splits?
He said. Splitfinger, his back to his friend, stiffened, his crooked fangs sliding over his taut lips as he grimaced. He clenched his fist, making sure it was hidden from Murder by the bulk of his not insubstantial head. Just before he could launch the surprise punch he was planning, Agler coughed.
Remember, boys, no arguing,
he said, then blew upon the smouldering matchcord of his blunderbuss to remove the ash and make it sparkle.
Poglin said I could shoot you if you got to fighting again, and I mean to follow orders. I knows how to be a good gob.
Murder and Splitfinger froze. As the cutlass was lowered and thrust into the dirt, the fist was unclenched.
It's better, said Agler. If you get that fixed before it's dark, then I don't need to tell Poglin anything about no naughtiness. He wants that ready real quick, just in case the fun starts tomorrow. You don't want the boss to miss out on his fun, do you, boys?
Bona Corso Fidelibus, the summer of 2401, continued. Other, even more powerful mercenary forces were also on the move, including the renowned Compagnia del Sole. Compared to other condottieri armies, this company had a long history, serving many different states. They remained, for now, in the service of Trantio, having resumed their manoeuvres in the Trantine hills, though to what purpose, beyond keeping them busy and ensuring they work for their pay, only they and the Prince of Trantio knew. They never camped in one spot for more than a few days, and their camp usually consisted of several palisaded compounds in fairly close vicinity, so that should the alarm be raised in one, the others might sally forth to their aid. Interlude. The Compagnia del Sole. It was evening, and the company was preparing to change watchers, to replace the guards on the gates and those patrolling the bounds, with the poor sods who would have to stay awake through the graveyard shift. A rumour had gone around earlier that this was almost certainly the last night they would camp here. In the last few weeks they had never stayed in one place more than 2 nights in a row, until they had got here, the furthest south they had been so far, where they had lingered for 5 nights. Many presumed this was because the difficult decision was being made concerning how best to employ them. Certainly riders went to and fro at every hour of the day, scouring the lands around for intelligence. It was generally hoped that whatever they found would lead to some good looting, for nearly every fellow in the company was itching to get their hands on some plunder. All the better to enjoy themselves when at last they returned to Trantio. The southernmost stockade had been palisaded partly with stakes, partly with wooden purvasers, and with the occasional gabion here and there to add some extra stability. All these were carried from camp to camp, bundled in wagons, the stakes replaced as and when necessary, the earth or rubble for filling the gabions got from wherever they camped. There was no shortage of crossbowmen in the company, each possessing his own purvase for use in battle, should it so be ordered, which meant there were plenty of purvasers to fill the gaps. It was intended that once loot had been acquired, the wagoneers would dump their timber burdens and fill up with rather more exciting loads. About half the dwellings were tents of waxed linen, the rest being huts fashioned from deal boards and turf. The officers had pavilions of cloth in the company colours, bearing the white rod and half-sun emblem of the company. The guards were vigilant, ready at any moment to let loose both a volley and the cry, "All arm." Each of the gates had an officer and a drummer in attendance, plus a good half-dozen or more crossbowmen. Being a company of good repute, which General Mazzolini did not want to tarnish, there was not one purblind man amongst the crossbowmen. This made them the first and best choice as sentinels, although whenever they were expected to guard through the night, they weren't exactly happy to be chosen. Somewhere within the camp. It was a good-sized piglet, which had been roasting for 3 hours already. Every mouth within 24 yards radius was watering, and not a man amongst them failed to wonder how long it might be before they could partake of its flesh. Most were busy with some task or another, whether it was oiling armour, sharpening a blade, or preparing their hut or tent, while the rest were chatting. Tending the spit was Donno, one of the lads who looked after the draught horses and mules, while Ottaviano and Baccio stood close to the fire, sipping not too sour wine from pewter goblets and discussing the company's business, as they often did. Both had had their hair trimmed by the company barber, the better to suit the hardships of campaign. Both were dressed somewhat more practically compared to the clothes they favoured when representing the company as chancellors. Everyone in the Compagnia del Sole was expected to serve in the field, to be soldiers first and foremost, whatever other office they held or responsibilities they had. Ottaviano wore both padded leather and a short-sleeved shirt of mail beneath the company's purple. His companion was unarmoured, but also wore the livery colours of the company, in his case the blue and red, as well as an embroidered badge upon his chest. A heavy blade hung from his waist. I cannot say I am surprised that Prince Girenzo was so keen to re-employ us for another term, said Baccio. What with the threats north and south of his realm, he's between a rock and a hard place. The rock, I take it, is made of bones, and the hard place happens to have green skin, suggested Ottaviano. You get my drift. So yes, it must be reassuring to have a company such as ours in his employ. Yet, then to send us about this business, merely to quarrel with his neighbour, or to threaten his neighbour, that's the part I don't understand. The threats you speak of are very real, said Ottaviano. But they also happen to be far away. Why shouldn't the prince tend to his own house first, the better to ensure he is ready to face those threats? Baccio took a gulp of his wine, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. So he isn't just keeping us busy in the meantime? Oh, no. Nor, I believe, is he trying to keep us happy, even if the lads are very content to indulge in a bit of pillaging. He's hoping to ensure that no one else takes advantage of the present situation at his cost. Consider this Duke Guidobaldo of Pavona. It seems to me, and I reckon to most others who have given it any thought, that he thinks he can take what he likes right now, because everyone is preoccupied with your rock and hard place. This might well be true, and it could serve Pavona very well when it comes to their own defence, but how does it help Trantio, or Remus, or Verezzo? If either the undead or the greenskins do reach this far, then they will indeed be powers to contend with, and if so, these city-states will need to stand together, as the Morite Church has decreed. That won't be so easy if Pavona has been busy stealing their castles and swallowing up their towns. Baccio frowned. Won't Pavona simply have to do the lion's share of the fighting, then? The more Duke Guidobaldo has, the more he can raise for the defence of the land. I don't doubt at all, said Ottaviano, that his numerous armies will fight most courageously against both foes. And should it happen, we will likely be amongst his forces, agreed Ottaviano. Nor do I doubt that he will require payment from all those who need him to fight. It's all about the sequence of events, my friend. Right now, everyone is distracted, fearful. So the Duke of Pavona snatches this, steals that, conquers the other. The rest are offended, but those to the north dare not turn their backs on the undead, and those to the south cannot show their arses to the greenskins. In the middle, meanwhile, Pavona's power grows. Then the threats draw closer still, and the Duke of Pavona, now made mightier by his conquest, offers, for a suitable price, to be the lion you spoke of, and protect his neighbours. He then does so, probably swallowing a few more choice tracts of land in the process, and consolidating his hold on what he has got, but winning nevertheless. Baccio smiles, and everyone says thank you. Oh, yes, they will be so grateful they will likely forget his past crimes, at least for a little while. It is hard to be angry at your heroic protector. The smile had gone from Baccio's face, replaced by a frown. So, Prince Lorenzo, by sending us, is making sure all that doesn't happen? He asked. I think I preferred the happy ending, where there was a mighty and heroic protector looking after everyone. Ah, said Ottaviano. I think that is also exactly the ending Prince Lorenzo desires. The difference is, in his story, he is the hero, not Duke Guidobaldo. Arrogant, aren't they, these nobles? Continued Ottaviano. You have to love them, though. Without men such as these, we would not have our living. Our only employ would be against the swarming greenskin hordes or the horrors of every hell. A miserable and likely very short existence. I'd rather have roast pork, wine, a bed of dry hay, and dreams of pretty wenches, and gold after the fighting. He turned to look over at the fire. What say you, Donno? The mule-skinner looked up, as if awakening from a dream. Huh? I want to know your opinion, asked Ottaviano. Pig's ready, came the answer. See, Ottaviano said to Baccio, there's another man who likes his roast pork. To be continued.